This work has been a long time coming. We started work on bumblebee species about 10 years ago, and almost one of the first things that we did was to think about the effects of extreme weather on whether a bumblebee species was likely to be present or absent from a particular place. But there were a bunch of reasons why 10 years ago this research was at the edge of what was possible, and it just turned out the data were not really powerful enough to let us see those things clearly. And we spent a number of years subsequent to that simply putting together a bigger and bigger data set that would let us see more clearly what the trends were for this vital group of organisms. And then in 2015 we were able to publish the first of our really critical papers on climate change and how bumblebee species were responding to climate change. And what that work showed us was that essentially the hottest places were beginning to experience conditions that were beyond the boundaries of what bumblebee species could tolerate. And so from the southern edges of where those bees were found, their ranges were rolling up like a rug. That kind of study was really helpful for us because it was the platform from which we could build something new. And the most obvious question that we could ask subsequent to that initial work was, why is this happening? And to do that, we got together with our colleague, Dr. Tim Newbold at University College London, and my extraordinary PhD student, Peter Chaurier, who's the lead author of this work. And what we did was we put our heads together and we started thinking about why climate change matters for organisms. And I remember there were some extraordinary science moments right at the beginning of this work where we were all standing in front of a whiteboard just drawing out ideas about how this could work. And we sketched out a process that could create an impact on whether a species went extinct or not, depending on whether temperatures were getting more extreme and more frequently extreme over time. And the trick was, how do you measure that? So we had to put that into operation, and then we could ask the question, does this link to whether bee species are disappearing over time, or does it not? And at the end of the day, we had what I think of as maybe one of the very first true eureka moments of my career, where everything we did seemed to actually work. We could actually predict extinction risk. But the origins of this work, I think the jumping off point for this work really is in that 2015 paper published in Science that told us that there was actually likely to be a strong link between climate change and bumblebees. That paper told us what the pattern was. This newest work, published today in Science, tells us why that pattern applies and shows that the pattern is probably a cause and effect one. And that gives us suggestions about what we can do to make this problem become more manageable in the future.
So you talk in this paper a lot about climate extremes. Can you explain what that means?
So the context in which we're working here is with respect to what an animal is able to tolerate. So an extreme condition for something like a penguin, say, would be completely different than an extreme condition for a bird that lives in the tropics. So we think about extremes in relation to what an organism has historically been able to tolerate. Everybody knows what extreme conditions feel like in terms of climate. We experience them sometimes with greater and greater frequencies in the summertime when we have incredible heat waves or prolonged droughts. Those kinds of events are becoming more frequent and they are becoming more extreme. The question for us in this study is, does the frequency of those events, does the degree to which they are extreme, determine whether an animal like a bumblebee species can continue to live in that place? And what we find is that as these events get more extreme, the heat waves get hotter, the heat waves come more frequently. As those things happen, the likelihood rises that bumblebee species are going to disappear, to go extinct from that sort of area. So climate extremes are a very familiar concept for everybody. The problem that we are able to address in this study is to demonstrate that those climate extremes are contributing to the extinction crisis we face globally today.